Hello gamers, Powered Heal back, and today we're going to talk about Druids. This will be the Druid deep dive, and we're going to touch on pretty much everything we did in the Priest deep dive, but for Druids. So we're going to touch on leveling, leveling spec, and then the majority of this video is going to be focused on the level 25, kind of like endgame. So what spec are you going to be healing, dungeons, and raids, and there may be a bit of a deviation in terms of the spec at 25, because we're going to talk about a kind of like a sort of like a hybrid damage spec as well, because that does seem like it potentially will be an option, and I'll get into that in a bit more detail once we get to that part of the video. But there's some unknowns that we don't know about it, and there's some rumors about a talent change, which keep in mind that I don't expect talents to really be changed for Season of Discovery. However, the way this was worded, it's a bit more plausible than I had initially thought, because it's not like a, completely new talent or anything like that. It just changes how a talent works to function with one of the new runes. And as you can see, like especially if you look at the rogue runes, some of them are already mentioned on the rune themselves that they function with some of the talents on the tree. So it's not inconceivable to me that the wording on this talent could be changed. But, I think the jury is out on that, and I haven't seen any posts about it. I'll actually bring up the two posts that I have them in the other tabs here, if you can see. So when we get there, I'll kind of sift through those with you and show you that I can't find any information on it, but we'll just have to see when the game comes out. But regardless, I want you to be prepared for if this does happen, you kind of know a little bit about how to play that build. Right, so like I said in the Priest video, my knowledge on Druid leveling is not exactly the best. So I'm going to give you my thoughts. I'm actually going to be starting Druid, so I have thought about this quite a bit at least. And I think a lot of it is really going to come down to the leveling, what leveling runes we're going to get, honestly. Because for Priest, the leveling was already pretty solid, and it's pretty structured like from 1 to 25, essentially. There's a pretty good progression there. Some of the new spells may change some things, right? Barrier can add damage reduction. You could take Penance. That may be good, it may not be good. We don't really have the exact numbers on that yet. And then we have the extra dot in the first tier, which could be good early. May not be so good. We don't really have all the data on that either, right? But even if you didn't have any of that stuff, Priest leveling was pretty solid. So I felt pretty confident talking about Priest leveling, because regardless of how good the new stuff is, it's going to be good. But for Druid, it's a bit different, because in my opinion, Druid has one of the... actually, we're just going to hop into the volume mixer for 1 second here and mute Discord. There we go. So that should fix that. Sorry about the distracting noises. But yeah, so I think Druid has one of the worst 1 to 25s. Well, at least like maybe not 1 to 25s, but like it has one of the worst like 1 to 20s. And I don't know if that's like necessarily a speed thing, like if that's actually the case, but to me it just feels awful to play. And I hate doing it, so I feel like Druid, if you're going to play Druid, unless there's drastic changes, it's definitely more of a, a questing spec than a grinding spec. But some of these new runes seem pretty powerful, so we're kind of going to talk about that a bit. And I think, actually, we're going to have to get into the runes first with this one. So let's pop up, I get the runes up here, right? So we're going to talk about the spec, but first we kind of need to talk about the runes a little bit, because... they may play a pretty important factor. Now, as you can see, we're kind of getting a lot more buttons to just do stuff in the game, right? Fury of the Storm Rage is also kind of a big thing. And we have stuff like Star Surge, right? We have Savage Roar, we have Sunfire, and Mangle. Now, the problem is we don't really, and Lacerate even, but we don't really know like what level we're going to get this stuff at. Typically on a Druid, you're basically like you start off the game, you have a staff, right, and you're casting Wrath, and you cast Moonfire. So Wrath into Wrath of Moonfire, and then you will cast some Wraths until the mob gets to you, and then you like melee it down, essentially, is the basic idea. You finish it off with the auto attacks from your staff. And honestly, for Druid, staff is not terrible. When you compare the Druid having a staff to like the priest having a wand, like you'd much rather have the staff because a lot of times you're just kind of doing those last hits anyway. So having like that nice chunky damage at the end is really good. Like you'll notice on the priest, if you don't get a wand by like level 8 or 10, if you try like autoing stuff that's autoing stuff that comes into melee range or whatever, it's very, very annoying. And Druid definitely has a bit better of a time with that. So in that regard, they're not really too bad, but that's how you're going to be spending most of your levels, or at least that's how I spend most of my levels from 1 to 10. And at 10, you typically get bear form, right? And bear form is pretty much what I use to level to like 20 when you get cat form, and then I basically go cat for the rest of the game. I believe the optimal way you're supposed to play bear form is you start by wrathing, right? And then you put a moonfire on them, and then you swap into bear, and then you finish them in bear. And the idea is your mana is kind of regened by that point, so you can kind of shift out, and then you put a if you need to heal yourself, you do, and if not, you just kind of carry on and do that same rotation that you did to the prior mob. And then there's also some bear AoE stuff, but I don't really believe you have a lot of capacity to do that earlier on. I think the thing with Druid is like, oftentimes you have the capacity to fight multiple things, but that may not be the most efficient way to actually kill things, if that makes sense. It's more just kind of like a contingency plan, or like a nice thing that you're able to do, whereas other classes might struggle or die. But if you have HOTS and you've kind of, you've cast it on a mob to start with, and then you shift into bear form and something else aggroes, a lot of times you can deal with those two mobs pretty easily. But that's pretty much how I would normally level like standard on a Druid. Now, there's a lot of new things here though, right? So we've got Sunfire, which could be quite effective as an additional dot if we get that. And then we have Mangle, which is just another button to press, right? So that's always good, 160% of the normal damage. And then we have things like Savage Roar and Skull Bash. We have Star Surge, which is interesting. I believe this is just like an instant cast nuke. Benefits from and triggers most talents and effects that trigger or benefit from Wrath of Starfire. Okay. Yeah, so that's kind of interesting, right? And then, but the real one that I'm like wanting to see, and I hope we get early, honestly, is Fury of the Storm Rage. If we get this early, it's going to be Chef's Kiss. I'm really hoping we get something like this, because I think this is like almost perfect, right? Just being able to sit there and spam Wrath is pretty decent, because Wrath is pretty good. You are going to run into the issue where, as a Druid, you don't have a shield. So once something does get in melee range of you, you can obviously, you're going to get spell pushback and stuff like that. But I think this is honestly would be a really strong boon to leveling, especially very early on. The thing is, once Bear gets Mangle, I'm not sure what would actually be better, this or that spec. But you could even potentially have this with Mangle, and like you could cast a bunch of Wraths and then dot the mob up with your 2 dots, and then actually no, because Mangle's in the same tier, right? But you'd basically dot the mob up, or you'd blast the mob with Wrath and then just swap to Bear or something like that. So I think this could be really interesting. This is also kind of interesting because it just makes you tankier as the Bear, right? Which is, and you get reduce all damage taken while it's by an additional 10% while in Bear. Yeah, so like this is kind of just good in general if you're going to be leveling Bear from 10 to 20, right? So a lot of this, I think, is going to really depend on what rune you get at what level, and we just have no idea yet. Like, having Star Surge in addition to this is actually nice, and it's a bit synergetic too, because normally you'd be taxed on your mana if you're just spamming Wrath, but the fact that your Wrath is free is kind of nice, right? Because you can cast Star Surge in there, and you can open with your other Starfire spell and stuff like that. So looking very interesting on Druid, but we can't really talk like super definitively on what's going to happen. So I'm just going to give you a couple like possible scenarios that I kind of thought of in my mind. Like the first one is assuming that we get this Fury of the Storm Rage relatively early, right? And if we do that, I think I'm maxing this absolutely. And then you kind of have a bunch of options. If you think that you still want to take that rune, but you find that the Mangle is also doing a lot of damage, you can do that thing I was just talking about where you start in caster form and you're spamming with Wrath, right? And this will help you get more Wraths in before the mob actually makes contact with you. And then you swap over to Bear or whatever, and you have natural weapons, right? So you're doing 10% physical damage in all forms, and then you can even get like Omen of Clarity, and that would allow you to either use a clear casting proc to like heal yourself afterwards, or you could could use an ability that doesn't cost any rage essentially, right? So there's all sorts of uses you could have for that. And then you could get something, you could do this if you want, which is going to extend the range that you're going to be able to beam things from even further. And you can maybe finish it off with Natural Shifter, right? If you're going to be doing the shifting style where you're wrathing and then swapping into Bear. So that's one interesting option depending on what we get. Right, and then now let's reset the whole thing. Yeah, another one could be a more pure spellcaster. So if you find that you don't need to be swapping into Bear, then maybe something like this is interesting, right? And then you could put something in here. The interesting thing about something like Nature's Grasp, right, is if you put this on yourself and the mob comes into you, especially, I mean, you could just, I guess, take more points in this, but it's probably going to proc eventually, right? Because it's 35% chance. You can just like kind of root them and then run away and then continue blasting even more, right? So it is definitely like interesting times to be a druid. And then you can either put these somewhere else. You can put them in the form shifting. I feel like caring about this tier is not super important, right? Because this is you're already going to be like level 25 by the time you put this point in, and it's like a 3% chance to stun or whatever. So it's kind of like whatever. But if it does proc, it's nice, right? So I feel like that would be the core of this version, the pure caster version. And then you could also do something like you go feral to put points in here. But the thing is, I think that almost regardless, unless you don't get Fury of the Storm Rage, right? If this is something that comes late, then you're just gonna have to go back to normal feral, right? Which would be something, I believe, like this. And then I think you would put the problem with I think you're actually okay with putting points in here. And then you just get the crit and the charge probably, and by then you're basically done. You could also, a lot of people like putting points into this first because it's just movement speed, right? And you will be cat by this level, so it's just going to be more damage, right, than Bear. So you'd go to cat at 20, and your Bear would kind of still be like lacking a little bit. And the problem is there's really not that much you can do, because the other thing you could do is like this, right? But by the time, let me actually fully reset everything. So this, right? And then you're already level 19. And by the time you max both these things out, which are would be the main contributors to your damage as feral, you're already level 24, right? So there's just not a lot you're going to be able to do to increase your feral damage like there is your caster damage. Like this is huge for casters, right? And then even something like this is kind of nice because even though you're not relying on Moonfire crit, it's also giving you Moonfire damage, which is good. And then this is like rooting the mob. So there's a lot of things you can do as like a caster kind of setup if you do get this rune. But if you don't, then, you know, you're pretty much going basic feral, I would say, where you're casting beforehand, swapping to bear, and then eventually you're just you're staying in cat for the most part once you hit beyond 20. And there's not a lot you're going to be able to do here, right? This is your damage thing, and then, you know, you can probably take bash. You put 3 points in this. Do something like this, and you're already almost level 25. Or you take this first, because for the movement speed, and then you're basically 25 here, right? So, yeah, just not a ton of innovation you can do there. The good news is that I think we're gonna get one of these. Like, we're either gonna get Fury the Storm Rage, right? Or we're gonna get Lacerate or Mangle or Sunfire, or we're gonna get Savage or Skull Bash or Stars. Like, we're gonna get something to add an additional bit of damage. We just don't know what it is. So I would just be ready to be sort of flexible and play around that. And I think like leaning into whatever style they give us with the runes is going to be the best possible choice there, and we're just going to have to make the decisions on the fly. So, you know, maybe on a Druid alt you could get the runes quicker or something like that and level up a different way. But if it's going to be your first time through, like mine's is going to be, you're just going to have to play it by ear. So, sorry, this is not really the most detailed leveling Druid portion, but I think that's about all we can really cover for now. Yeah. So there's that. And let's get into the endgame stuff, right? The level 25. So this is where I was saying you're going to have the two potential builds for Druid. And I'll get into that thing I was talking about with the possible talent change now because it's going to be relevant. So basically what somebody was saying is that this talent right here, Omen of Clarity, if you read it, it says, imbues the Druid with natural energy. Each of the Druid's melee attacks, key point melee attacks, has a chance of causing the caster to enter a clear casting state, and then clear casting state reduces mana rage energy cost of your next damage or healing a spell or offensive ability by 100%. Right? So this is really good, right? But the problem is that what was being relayed to me was that this had gotten changed or was rumored to be changed, where it's just on ability and not on melee attack, or attack or ability or something like that. Or it said attacks and not melee attacks, which could mean ability. And basically the thought process that the person had was what you're going to be able to do is take Fury of the Storm Rage, and you're going to have that in there, right? And then you're going to be able to probably do this, I would assume. Oh, you actually have to take that. That's right. Okay. So yeah, you take this, right? And this is already 20 of your points, but it's kind of powerful because you're just casting Wraths, and then not only are you potentially getting instant healing touches, right? But they also have a high chance of being free. And then what you can also do is, even when you don't proc an instant from this, you can use the clear casting that you get from this, or vice versa, right? So you can heal without it being free, but it's instant. You can heal with it being instant and free if you get both of them at the same time. Or you can get, you can just use the Omen proc on whatever you need at the time as well, right? So like a free healing touch or something like that. So if this is actually true, and then I think how I'd round this out, it depends. Like, some people might want you to take this, especially if you're going to be the only Druid, but you could also just easily put 2 points in here and then put 3 points in here, right? And this is a very interesting spec, honestly. Now, I don't know if this would be like a main healer spec. The thing about stuff like this is, even if let's say you wanted it to be a main healer spec, right? You could still technically do that, because you could still, at any time you need to cast a hard heal, you can always do that, right? There's no restrictions to any of this. So if suddenly you can't fish for procs with Wrath and somebody's taking damage and they need to be healed, you can just throw a normal healing touch on them, right? It's not the end of the world. And even though I think the Druid does have kind of good 25 resto talents, even I will recognize that it's not like make or break to be invested in the resto tree. Like, I think you're going to be able, especially dungeon content, you're going to be able to heal it being almost like whatever spec as long as you have intelligence gear. And we'll get into that in like the gearing video. But yeah, you should be able to heal it as pretty much any spec. The raid may be a bit more difficult and probably would lend itself more to having like an actual resto spec. However, like, depending on how good the damage and stuff from this is, like, I feel like you could actually have like a Druid that is like a maybe like a third healer. It's kind of like an off healer, right? And he's basically like almost like a boomkin, and he's just casting into the boss, like fishing through these procs. He's maybe doing like reasonable damage. You know, he's got his double dots up potentially, and he's star surging and he's spamming Wrath, and then he's healing when he gets the free heals or the instant heals when somebody needs to be healed. So that is kind of like an interesting healer sort of hybrid spec you could do. But even if you wanted him to be the primary healer, I feel like you could still run this spec if this is possible. But, you know, you would just have to be cognizant that there's going to be some times where you need to like switch for, like, you know, just concentrate on actually doing the healing portion, right? Like, so you don't want to get, like, if that is the case where you're the second healer and they're only running 2 healers in a group, even if this spec is a thing, you don't want to get giga-baited into only maybe spamming Wrath and only healing when you get your procs, right? Like, be cognizant and just be healing people when you need to as well, I would say, is kind of like the thing I'd be careful about with that. But, you know, it's still definitely an interesting playstyle. I think more than likely, though, this is not how it's intended to be. Like, that sounds really overpowered, right? So I would imagine that that's not the case. But I still think that... Let's go back into this. So that, remember, your choices here are Fury of the Storm Rage and Living Seed, right? So Living Seed is when you critically heal your target with any healing spell, you plant a Living Seed on the target for 30% of their amount healed. Now, you're not going to have good crit as a Druid at all, because nobody's going to have good crit, even with like the world buff. Now, as a Druid, you don't even have access to like the Priest 5% crit, and you don't have access to your regrowth crit, because there's no way you're getting down here, right? So your crit is going to be piss poor, and what I think that means is that regardless, you're probably going to take Fury of the Storm Rage for your rune, because by level 25, you should have them all, right? So, even if you're doing like a full resto spec, you probably do have Fury of the Storm Rage, which kind of makes the actual resto spec a bit interesting, because my inclination is to do something like this, right? And then I think normally I would take Insect Swarm, and then I would probably put like a point in there or something, and then put 1 point in here, 1 point in here. But I'm not too concerned about Nature's Focus, keep in mind, because, again, you're probably not going to be getting hit in a raid or dungeon setting. So you could actually just put 3 points into here, which I think people may do. Now, depending on if your team wants to use the Insect Swarm, which, I mean, this is not a terrible, terrible ability, I feel like, right? Like, I don't want to say that it's, like, super good or anything, but, you know, it is reducing the mob's chance to hit, right? It's not the worst thing in the world. And if you feel like that's necessary, or if you feel you just want to do it, you could just drop a point from Wrath, right? And put the point in Insect Swarm. And to be honest, it's probably... That would probably be the most optimal play, right? Because, I mean, missing 0.1 second of the cast of Wrath is probably worth it to have like an ability like Insect Swarm, I would say. Another thing you could do is you could fully invest in this, right? And then you invest in this. And then you invest in this. And then you have 1 point left and you just go Insect Swarm. Right? So you could do something like this. And it's kind of like the priest build where you don't have your mana talent, but your fully improved wrath, full improve this, right? So I think either of those work. Obviously, like just having this is like the better pure healer build, I think. But this might make your playstyle feel a bit more fluid. You know what I mean? And if we're trying to get Insect Swarm in both of them, then you're missing out on like 0.3 from this, which is kind of a big deal. You'll definitely notice that when casting your wraths, right? So it's kind of just going to be up to you, I guess, to decide what you think is like more important in those situations, right? But I think you will be DPSing as Druid. Like the idea is you're going to be spamming the shit out of wrath, and then healing when necessary. And like I said, you just don't get tunneled on the procs, right? So if somebody needs to be healed regardless, you heal them. But when nobody needs to be healed, or, you know, if you say you have a paladin with beacon that's kind of taking care of things, you just tunnel the boss with wrath and it's free, which is amazing. And then you have those heals in your pocket, which is like really nice. So yeah, I think, and they're instant, which is kind of insane when you think about it, right? So yeah, I think that's kind of going to be the play style essentially. So you're going to use this probably no matter what, and just like it's just going to, how useful it's going to be is going to depend on like, can you actually come down and get this? Like, does this actually work with wrath? Again, I'm thinking probably not, but that was a rumor that I heard. So yeah, I think this is going to be what you're going to do, basically something like this, and then you're going to be wrath spamming and then healing when you need to. And speaking of the healing, let us get into the actual spells. So there's kind of like a lot here, to be honest. I'm gonna go over things initially that I tend to like not like, okay, and then we'll kind of work out from there. So, well, actually, I think let's just go over them like one at a time. We'll cover these spells like after the new ones, and we will just start with like the basic stuff. Okay, so Healing Touch. I don't think you're going to be using rank 1. Don't think you're going to be... I mean, rank 2 is like a little bit better, but I don't think you're really going to be using rank 2. I think that mainly you're going to be using rank 3 right here. Like, this is honestly a nice chunk of healing for a pretty low cost of mana. And it's only going to be a 2-second cast when you actually take the talents, right? So this is going to be pretty decent. The one thing keep in mind is that it doesn't, it's below level 14. So like I talked about in the priest video, spell coefficients are a huge thing. And what a spell coefficient is it's basically like a number that filters out, or that filters your plus healing or plus damage to a spell. So if a spell has a 100% spell coefficient, it's getting full value from either the plus healing you're adding to it or the plus damage. And if a spell has a 50% coefficient, it's getting 50% of the value. Now, in your Prebis, you're not going to have to worry about spell coefficients very much because there's not going to be a ton of plus healing that you're going to have on your gear. However, it could be possible, but that like when everything is said and done in the actual raid itself and you have like BIS raid gear, you may have like 100 plus healing or something of that sort. You know what I mean? It's definitely possible with some of the items have a bit of healing on them like that. So if that is the case, then the coefficient thing becomes a little bit more important, right? And it's something to look into. And basically the idea is that anything below level 20 has a coefficient that does not, that is like altered and is made inherently worse. And I believe the reason for that is that they don't want super high level play or super high level players using low level, like very, very low level spells with a ton of plus healing, right? Because it kind of breaks the game a little bit. So they intentionally ruin like the very, very low spells. I think they like the concept of the down ranking, but they don't, it can get a bit too out of hand. Because you basically have so little mana and stuff at the start that the spell costs need to be so low. So it's not like a linear thing, if that makes sense. I think healing rank 4 healing touch is the next healing touch we'll talk about, and this is the sometimes considered the best spell a druid has. It's super mana efficient because it's right at that level 20 threshold, so it benefits from its full normal spell coefficient, which I believe is like 80 some percent. And you have the talent, which brings it down to 2.5 second cast, and it heals like a pretty decent amount. And the mana cost is not obscene at all. It's only 185 mana. So this is like a really solid spell that you can be like cancel casting on the tanks and stuff like that. You can even do like spot healing with this, probably in a 10-man, because you just have a lot more control over your partner. You can communicate with them. You can be like, I got this guy or something like that, or I'll heal these people. Stuff like this is harder to spot heal with in like raids because it just gets sniped, right? Because it's still a bit too slow because there's like lesser heals and chain heal bounces and flash heals, and you just can't really compete with all that stuff. But in a 10-man situation or a, obviously a 5-man, this is like a really good, it's your bread and butter spell. And I like that this is kind of like the spell you have at level 20 because, like I said in the priest video, I feel like a lot of the lower level stuff is going to be about trying to get the most per heal out of your heal, because I don't think damage is going to come in super fast in these fights. So I think it's kind of going to be like, make sure I don't overheal and try and cast as little as possible. Well, in the case of Druid, you're going to be casting Wrath as the filler, but I believe since it costs no mana, you still stay out of the 5-second rule. I'm not entirely sure about that. We'll have to see once we get into game. But I believe that 5-second rule, which in case you don't know what that is, that's like the rule where you get a bit of a mana bump when you haven't been casting for 5 seconds. I think that if what you're casting doesn't cost mana, it doesn't count towards that, and I think that's why the priest's divine favor or whatever it is doesn't interrupt the 5-second rule either. Not 100% sure on that, but I think that's how it's going to go. So yeah, rank 4 healing touch, insane. You may also use this one, but keep in mind if you do start getting some plus healing, this one is going to pull away by far over this one because it's just going to get the full benefit from the coefficient and everything like that. So ranks of rejuvenation. Well, we'll do those next. Rejuvenation. Okay. So I think this is going to be both of these are too little. I think rank 3 is where we start getting to like, okay, we can use this spell. Is there another rank we get? Yeah, we get rank 4. Okay. So this is like very similar to the priest's renew, except it has a slightly worse coefficient. The priest is 100%, and then the druids is 80%. And then but what happens is eventually druid in Blackwing Lair gets like, if you get 8 piece tier 2, it adds another tick, which effectively makes it 100% like the priest's renew, right? So this is, like I mentioned in the priest video, normally not a big fan of HOTS, but in these lower settings, like these lower party settings and 10-man raid settings, HOTS can actually be quite effective, especially if you are paired with another single target healer, or like a paladin or something. Even though the paladin's probably going to have beacons, so they're going to be doing some spotting, but you can kind of let them know, I'm taking care of this group with rejuves or something like that. And I think even without any plus healing, this is still going to be a pretty good spell to use at least some of the time when you can guarantee it doesn't overheal. That's the main thing you have to be looking for with these HOTS, is that they don't overheal. Because as soon as you start getting like 50-40% overheal with them, the mana efficiency just completely tanks, right? But until then, it's kind of good, and not only is it good in like a a mana efficiency sense, but also in an HPS sense. This is an instant cast spell that's going to stay on the target for 12 seconds, right? So it allows you to like be healing other people during that time. So if people are taking damage that's not like lethal, you can just toss a rejuve on them to get them back up before they take more damage that would be lethal, etc. So I think rejuve is a good spell, and it will see use in both 5-mans and BFD. Spells like this are very good in 5-mans, especially on the tank, right? Because and it could be in the raid too. Like if you're solely charged with healing the tank, having hots on the tank in a 10-man raid or a 5-man dungeon is really good, because typically the bosses, and I think this is especially going to be the case since we're in a lower level bracket, so for low level dungeons, lower level raids, they just don't hit hard enough for you to be like super concerned about dragging out your actual casted heals a little bit more and waiting on casting those, because that's the problem with using hots. I was explaining in the priest video at max level, is that the boss deals such a large percentage of your health or the tank's health as like a single hit, that and you also can't know that your hots are going to tick during that period, right? So you can't really cast like a lower rank heal assuming that your hots are going to tick, and therefore they're going to be supplemented by your hots, and the tank's going to be fine. You basically have to cast as if, there's no hots on the tank, which means that when you cast that big heal, then the hots are most likely going to overheal after that, right? Or if the hots tick, you're still casting that big heal, so part of that big heal is now going into overhealing, right? Because the hots already healed them. And you can't really afford to just throw hots up on a tank and not heal them in a max level 60 raid, right? Level 60 40-man. Or even like a ZG, some of the things in there hit so hard, you need way more than hots to keep the tank up. So that's why what makes hots really tricky to use in those situations, but with the damage, it's probably going to be way scaled back, even relative to the health. Like I don't think it's going to be like a linear thing. I think your tank is just going to take less of a percentage of their health of damage period from this. There's going to be less scary abilities as well. So if that is the case, these spells like Rejuvenation and Regrowth, which we'll talk about in a second, just become way more useful, right? So Regrowth, again, has one of these that breaches the level 20. Let's go back and just check some of these. So the problem with these Regrowths is that they're all heavy mana cost casts, right? Now, this is a pretty efficient spell if you can get everything out of it, right? There's no denying that. And it has a pretty quick cast time. So this could still be good for tank healing. In a 5-man, absolutely. In a in a 10-man where you have full agency over, like, I know I'm going to be the only one healing the tank or something, or I can predict that we're going to get full value out of this renew. And I definitely, if you are doing one of those like tank healing rolls or you're healing 5-mans, I definitely wouldn't worry about using this. Like it's not bad to use at all, because it just will let you kind of either get more wraths in, or even if you don't have that rune yet or something when you're leveling, you'll be able to just get more regen time in, right? And then at 25, you are going to have the rune no matter what. So you're basically going to be able to put your hots on the tank and then cast a free damage spell to add more damage. And then you just heal when, you see that they're starting to lose the HP war when the hots aren't enough, right? And then you just reapply the hots. And as long as this stuff is getting full value, it's absolutely fine to cast, and it's mana efficient, right? So I think pretty much you can use a lot of the Druid spells, and the more plus healing you have, the more you're going to lean into the max rank of the spells, and then try and use those to carry your healing so you don't have to do as much of it, so you're getting more regen, right? And then the lower maybe and the worse off your mana pool is and the less plus healing you have, then you can experiment with other ranks as well, right? And obviously for stuff like that you're going to be casting on raid members, like you may not want to cast a rank for Rejuve if you think that it's going to overheal them or something like that. You may cast a rank 3 if they only need a little bit of health or something like that. So it just depends on what you're trying to do, but I think you're actually going to be mostly sticking to the max ranks. At least max rank Rejuvenation. You could maybe down rank Renew, especially if the mana cost is getting a bit high for you or something like that, and you'd still have sort of a similar effect there, right? And then obviously you're going to be casting Fairy Fire, you're going to be casting your Cure Poison if you need it. I think those are the main spells, right? So we can kind of get into the newer stuff. Okay. So Life Bloom. This spell, again, is insanely good when it is not overhealing. And because it gives mana back, it is kind of even good when it's doing a bit of overhealing, right? But I would absolutely... I can't imagine probably not having this on the tank, I think. Again, as long as you have kind of sole agency over the heals coming in and stuff like that, as long as you can make sure it's not doing an egregious amount of overhealing, this is a good spell. It's going to give you the mana back, and so it has the bloom effect. Is this the bloom? Is this what they're... Oh yeah, okay, they separate it into two separate things here, right? When it completes the duration, the target is instantly healed. So yeah, so the reason why this is such a good spell in 5-mans, as well as in like 10-mans or small case healing situations, is you can control the bloom, essentially, right? Which is very powerful, because part of the spell's budget is in the bloom. So if you're just tossing life blooms up and rolling life blooms all the time, it gets expensive, right? But if you allow it to bloom afterwards, then you're getting that nice chunk of heal, essentially, right? And you basically know when this is expiring. So you can kind of let the tank dip low and let this bloom, and you have maybe other hots on to help supplement them while you're wrathing and stuff like that. I think this could be a very good spell early on, like I said, for 5-mans and raiding. And it also kind of, it's also benefited by the same thing I just said with the other hots, where because the tank is probably not going to be getting crushed, you can like look at your hot and be like, okay, that's about to bloom in a couple seconds. He's going to be okay. Like, you don't have to worry about, oh, I need to put that little chunk of his health back because he's about to take like a 4K hit, Right? And he could take 2 4K hits if the boss thrashes and then he's dead. Like, you don't have to deal with that stuff at this level range. Unless they add like absurd bosses, right, to the game, but probably not. So you're just going to be way more in control. And the more in control you are as Druid, the more mana efficient you're going to be, the better all these spells become. So I think this could be honestly like a very good spell for sure, and you will probably absolutely be using it. This is just like the second part of it. This is the bloom part of this, I think, in the thing is why it's showing it like that. Living Seed. So, like I said, I personally think we're going to avoid this in Tier 1 at least. This may have some application down the road, especially with that regrowth build, where you can have like very high crit, right? But right now, I don't think it even says what it does there, but this is what it does. We already went over it a little bit. The problem is just like you're not going to be critting enough, I think, right? And the damage you're going to get from this and the ability to have instant cast healing touches, I just can't see you taking this, if that makes sense. I think that one's easy and a no-brainer. And the other thing I want to mention about just this in general, right, is that you may be thinking that, healers doing damage is a meme, sort of, right, in Classic. And I tend to agree in the sense that, unfortunately, a lot of, like, Classic isn't really set up very well for healers to do damage because of the hit and stuff like that. You tend to be, like, you're not stacking hit as a healer, right? So a certain portion of your casts are just going to miss, which really hurts It helps, yeah. Really hurts your obviously just your damage, but also it makes it like even more mana inefficient to heal. But the problem is like I remember being in Psalm in like Molten Core, and it got to a point where even though Molten Core was harder, we had kind of like we had outgeared it, we mastered it or whatever, and we're kind of blowing through it. And people are like, "Oh, why don't you just smite like some bosses now? Just start smiting them." And it's like because people don't understand like, and like I come from retail, right? So like, and I don't play a ton of healer in retail to be honest. I mostly play DPS, but I'm fully aware that the retail healers and the fact that they do a sizable amount of damage, right? But you're just not set up to do good damage in classic WoW because you don't have any spell damage, right? In retail, a lot of times I believe the stat that gives you like plus healing applies to both, right? So you don't have that, you don't have hit, and most of the time your abilities are just doing pitiful damage. And they're missing, and it's costing you mana on top of that, right? So it's like, yeah, even if I don't need to spend my mana for healing this Magmadar fight on Psalm or whatever, the problem is like, and I guess maybe Magmadar is a bad example because there's kind of like a long run typically after Magmadar that you can tick drink. So Magmadar is like one where, yeah, it's probably fine if you cast some smites or whatever. But on the other bosses, you can dump your mana pool in smite, and you can, as a priest or whatever, or wrath as a druid or anything like that, and you can kill the boss fine, right? Like you're not letting anybody die because you're still healing when you need to, and then you're casting these offensive spells. But then the problem is you're still low mana when you go to leave the fight, and with the speedrunning culture in Classic, even I find that even if you're not in a speedrunning guild, a lot of guilds tend to like to improve their instance time or just go fast and kind of get the content done, period, right? So you're not getting a full drink after you kill like Gar or something like that. You're going right in and you're pulling more trash. So it's just annoying to be like low mana going into something like that because somebody wants you to do a little bit more pitiful damage to the boss. It doesn't really work. But this is completely different, right? Because you're not using any mana, which just that in itself is huge, and it's directly benefiting your ability to heal with the instant healing touches, right? So it's like you're not costing mana. It's directly like helping your healing, and then on top of that, this is not the point of the game where you tend to have large amounts of either plus healing or plus damage, right? So your Wrath is actually not going to be as bad relative to what it would be if you're casting it at level 60. Where, like, at level 60, a caster is expected to have, etc., like a certain amount of plus damage, right, before they even enter MC. So when you go in MC as a healer, and you have, like, 400, 500 plus healing in your Prebis or whatever, and you have no plus damage and you're casting Wrath on the boss, you're not really doing anything. But when you go into BFD at level 25, you're not expected to have like anything. All your spells are base, right? So relative to other damage dealers, your Wrath is going to be doing better than it would have done at 60, etc. Right? So that's like something else to keep in mind here. And the hit problem is still going to be a bit of a thing, but there's actually going to be like the I'll get into it in the Druid gearing guide, but there's they're adding pieces with hit. So especially on the Druid, it may be worth, especially if you can get some caster pieces that have like decent other stats and stuff like that, to pick that up. One of the pieces is going to be crafted. I believe it's the boots, which I don't know if Druid is going to get its own, or if Druid is going to, like, or sorry, not its own, but if, like, Leatherworking is going to get a pair of those boots as well, or if those boots are only cloth, but we'll talk about that in the gearing video. But there's basically boots that give, like, 1% hit, and they give, like, 50% damage mitigation, or something like that. So something like that could be really useful with this Fury of the Storm Rage build for sure. So, yeah, I hope I hope that we get some stuff like that. And I just wanted to like reaffirm that this is not going to be a complete meme using this ability, especially early on. Because I know that some people are probably very skeptical of doing damage while healing in Classic, but this is a situation where it's actually going to be like a reasonable thing to do, right? Like, you're not just completely trolling by doing it, so just wanted to kind of reassure you guys, because you may be like, this whole video he's been talking about like weaving in like wraths and stuff like that, and like, are we really going to do this? And I really think I think you're kind of trolling if you're not doing it, so long as you don't need to be healing, if that makes sense, right? And I don't think the fights are going to be so active where you're going to be needing to heal all the time. And the 5-man's especially not, right? Especially if you, as a druid, you even have more luxury, like I said, because you have all the different hots you can have ticking doing passive healing while you're actually spamming your wraths and stuff like that. So I definitely think you will be casting Wrath in phase 1 quite a bit as a druid. But yeah, so going back into the last 2 spells here, Wild Growth and Efflorescence. So we'll do Wild Growth first. This is it's kind of like the Prayer of Healing for the druid, right? But it actually is more like Circle of Healing because it's the target's party. So that aspect is always really good, right? It's not just limited to your own party. And the fact that it is first applied quickly and then slows down is also great as well, because typically you're going to want to use this in a situation where, a group gets chunked, you need some AoE healing, so you put it back, and if it heals more at first, it's less likely to do overhealing, essentially. Right? In other words, you wouldn't want it the other way around, where it kind of ramps up, because that gives people more time to snipe, and less of your healing got done in that portion. Whereas with this, since it's doing more healing right up front, people may actually be less inclined to snipe you, right? Because you casted it on the group and it already healed a decent chunk. By the time their cast is about to finish, they're like, oh, maybe that's not worth. I'm going to do a bunch of overhealing, right? So I think this ability, it's going to be good. It's just a question of like the priest circle of healing. It's like, it seems like it's going to cost a lot of mana, obviously, right? And it seems like the other issue is I'm not sure like how many situations we're actually going to get to use this, because I don't know how heavy the raid damage is really going to be, right? And in order for this to be good, you need to get full value out of it. So again, it's kind of going to be a communication thing. I mean, I think in 5-mans, again, spells like this are really good. Just having the capability to AoE heal and to have the heal hit everybody in your group is typically a good thing in a 5-man, especially in vanilla, right? Because spells, this is not like a super common thing all the time. Druids had nothing like this before, so it only gives you more flexibility. It can't make you worse. The worst case, you just don't use it, right? If it's too much mana, or if you can't find the right situations to use it all the time, you just don't use it. But there will be situations where it'll be the best spell to cast, and you cast it in those situations, and you should be fine. I think the one thing is kind of like I said with the priest video, you need to be careful not like baiting yourself into using it because too often, and destroying your mana pool, because there'll be situations where people will be chunked in a group, but they don't need healing right away. And maybe they don't really need healing for a while even. And there could be like, and the tank needs to be kept up and mana's kind of getting low, right? And you don't want to be like, oh, well, technically it's the more mana efficient heal to wild growth those 5 people. So that's the correct decision, right? You don't want to have those types of decision trees. Your decision tree needs to be what needs to be done for us to succeed in this fight. So always keep that in mind, that even though mana efficiency is something that should always be on your mind, it's not the only thing that should be on your mind. And you do need to safeguard your mana to be able to protect the tank going later into a fight sometimes, where if you know the DPS aren't going to actually need to be healed, right? If they can survive, or maybe they can even bandage or something, or health potion, right? So don't get too baited by stuff like Wild Growth, but it is good. That's the only thing I'd want to say and caution you about. Efflorescence. So this says 100-yard range. I don't know if this is... Oh, something I just wanted to point out. You notice that this has the same base mana cost as this, but this is giving you mana back. Keep in mind, you're getting like half the cost. So it's not actually going to be like as destroying, essentially, as you might think. Just wanted to point that out because people might be seeing that and they'll be like, "Oh, well, Life Bloom is terrible too," but you're getting the mana back, right? So that's something important to factor in. So this is not one of the runes that was shown to us initially, but it's one of the runes that's in one of these articles. I'm going to click on these quickly after we get done with this to just show you that I can't find that Omen of Clarity change that people are talking about. But yeah, it was added in one of those, and we don't really know much about it. The thing that it says 100-yard range, I don't think it's like that in retail, but I haven't played a Druid in retail in a long time. So this could actually just not be a thing. Or it could be like a secondary effect of something else, potentially. Maybe it's like a rune that was going to get added and it's a leftover thing, because this is one of the data mine things. It wasn't one of the BlizzCon things. So all this data mine stuff, you have to be a little careful. Like there's one for Paladin that the flash of light seems to give you like a hot after. I don't know if that's going to be in the game. That sounds really overpowered. So I'm not sure if this is going to be in the game, but we don't have a mana cost for it is the other thing. It doesn't have a cast time. It's instant, and we don't have a cooldown. So this just screams to me that it's like from something. It's like an effect of something else is what it's screaming to me right now. But let's take a look. Heals up to 3 party members within 15 yards of the target for times 2 over 100. So I think it's just we're going to need more information on it, right? I'm just really not sure what it is yet. And like, it has that sort of like smart heal chain heal effect, but the problem with stuff like this is it's like party or raid members. Okay, so the good thing is it mentions raids, so I think it can hit people. It's going to be like chain heal where it can hit people outside the party as well, as I believe. So it shouldn't be that bad if there's something like this is in the game. Because assuming like, you can obviously see, you can look at like something like your melee, right? And they'll be like trunked out from maybe like a Molten Giant Stomp. Or sorry, not Molten Giant, but something like a Molten Giant Stomp maybe in the new raid. And then, because I'm sure there'll be like incidental damage going out to the melee, right? And you can be like, oh, okay, these people are chunked. There's enough people here. There's like 3 people taking damage. I'll cast this, and it should auto-target those people as long as they're in the 15-yard range. So I think like using this on melee, or people that are going to be grouped if range have like a stack or something like that, should be fine. But we just don't have like any information on it really. And I'm going to pop into these and we'll see if there's any more information given there. So this is the talents, right? We already went over the talents. And I wanted to just show you guys this because, see, there's nothing. This is like an idol thing. And these idols are going to get added. And I'm not sure if this is what the guy was talking about. That maybe one of these idols is supposed to provide a change to Omen of Clarity. But because they all say like proc trigger spell. But they don't actually tell us like what is happening, right? Like this one has to do with rage. This is inspiration. And then if you click on them, there's really no details. It just says like learn a new ability. But it's weird because it's a relic slot. So you would think that it doesn't list as a rune, it lists as like a relic, and then it says on here to use a new ability. So unless you pick this up as a relic and then use it and it gives you the rune. But again, this is all data mine stuff, right? So it's hard to really super lean into this and see what we have. But it would make sense that they're adding new idols, I guess. Maybe some of these are from the actual raid, so maybe we won't even have them. but I think we're just going to have to shelve this conversation for now. I think they're also looking at some of the flavor texts. Like something like this seems like it maybe could have that thing where it affects Omen of Clarity, but there's just nothing I see here that like makes me think that that's truly the case, right? And then, okay, so this is basically the same thing. Okay, so this is basically what was put there, but we don't have a lot of, yeah, it's the same thing basically. And then, yeah, as you can see, there's nothing in the Druid notes here that seems to indicate anything about Omen of Clarity, right? So I just wanted to show you guys, and you can go to Wowhead yourself and you just go to news, and then you keep scrolling until you get to like the BlizzCon announcements, right? Because that was when the first stuff would be released, and I can't find anything about that either. But yeah, it'd be something to look out for when we get into game, is all I would say. And look out for like maybe idols or runes that do it. And obviously, like, I'm going to be playing the game as well, so if I find stuff, I'll make an updated video on this. So, don't worry about it. I'll get you covered there. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it for Druid. I think Druid is going to be one of the stronger classes, honestly. Because I think having the ability, and I'll talk about this more in the gear video, but having the ability to max this while having your healing touch cast time reduced is like really good. And then having this on top of it, right? Or not, maybe if you go to max this out, you won't have it maxed, but you can either do this or this, right? And just being able to contribute any damage like that for literally free is amazing. And something the other classes like really can't do right now. I think Shaman has an ability that can do it, but the Priest can't really, and Paladin can't. So I actually think Druid could be like one of the strongest healers in Phase 1, to be honest. I think Priest is still the most versatile, and Priest still has Power Word Shield, which can be powerful. But I really do think Druid is going to be very strong, especially because you're not just going to be able to like flash heal snipe everything, right, on Shaman and Druid and stuff like that, which means that spells like rank 4 healing touch, they're in like their environment, or they can do a lot of work. And this is one of the best healing spells, the best 2.5 second healing spells for its level, in terms of like healing done and mana efficiency and everything like that, right? And it's supplemented by the reduced cast time, and you can probably take some of this or some of this in most cases as well, depending on how you want to do your build, which means that if you get Spirit on the Druid, it's going to be more effective actually than Spirit on the Priest. So yeah, I think Druids are going to be really strong, and like this is the situation that benefits them the most. It's low targets, which means they can take more care in using their spells. They can communicate to the other player that's healing with them, so there's less overhealing, which is great for Druid. It's like the ideal situation, and they get their star spell rank 4 healing touch like at level 20 essentially. So it's good because it's not like it's at level 25 and it costs like super high percentage of your mana. It's sort of like a downrank spell almost, and it happens to be basically like one of their best, most cost-efficient spells. So I think Druid, and they're doing the damage, right? So I think Druid is just going to be really, really good. Like I said, Priest still more versatile overall, but Druid's kind of just filling a different role, being able to do damage while still doing really, really solid healing, still having good regen. So I would definitely look out for Druid, and I think if you wanted to play Druid as a healer for Phase 1, you wouldn't be disappointed. The shitty thing is, still don't have a res. I don't know if we have combat res though, which is nice, right? I mean, hey, combat res is powerful. So in a raid setting, you'd rather them have the combat res. Priest definitely doesn't have a combat res. So Paladin doesn't have a combat res. So I think Druids are going to be really good, honestly. And they give good buffs too with Thorns and Mark of the Wild. So really looking forward to play my Druid, and if you guys are looking for a healer, Druid is definitely a solid one to play. And like I said, I will update this. This might be one of the first ones I'm updating because I think my Druid is getting old first. So we will we'll see when the game comes out. But thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate all the support. Like, subscribe, comment if you liked the video. If you didn't, it's totally cool. I'm gonna try and put some timestamps on this one to help you guys get through it quick. And yeah, just thank you guys, and I will see you tomorrow with another video.